Hello and welcome to another episode of Getting Started.Life, the show that teaches you step by step how to start new things. We try and keep it to 5 steps. Sometimes it goes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but we get you the information that you need to start new things. The show today is brought to you by Keystone Mediation and Red Lake Funding. Thank you for your support to both those companies. So, great show today. We have Grammy award-winning Matthew
We've never
Carrol,
had a Grammy award-winning artist forever.
Grammy award-winning artist, opera singer, does the national anthem at the Bulls on occasion, and just a great guy. I know him from outside his singing career, so I can say that. But and he's going to talk a little bit about how you can do this, do it as a career. I think there's a lot of people who do it as a hobby. And my guest, and we were talking a little bit in the virtual green room there about turning it into something that pays the bills is a little bit more involved and difficult. But Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into performing, specifically singing, and your opera. So I want to understand how you took that, like you got Mick Jagger and you got like opera singers. What made you go opera versus like rock and roll?
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you, Doug, Marya. Good to see you both. Thanks for having me on. One of the things that I like to talk about is I'm an advocate for the arts and for classical music. And as we get more involved with social media and technology and things like that, people are listening to classical music less and less, and maybe appreciating the arts less and less, which is not great for society. Most advanced societies show that they have a very strong arts community. So what got me started was going back to high school. I was on the high school, I think this is my junior year. I was on the high school basketball team and I hurt my knee and I was going to miss the rest of the season. And my mother said to me, you're not going to sit around the house and mope because you can't play basketball. You're going to try out for the High School Musical. So I said, okay, why not? I like to sing. It's fun, but I've never, had any training or anything. And when you know it, they were doing the musical Camelot, and I got cast as King Arthur as the lead role. And I loved it. It just, it lit the bug and the fire within me. And really, really enjoyed performing in the musical and the amount of hard work and the memorization skills that it took. But then on top of that, all the different layers that people don't, when you go see a show or you go see a concert, you're seeing the final product, but nobody sees how the sausage is made. And I know nobody knows what went into that. And there's so many levels. And so that's kind of a little bit what I want to talk about today.
Now, now musicals, obviously I was in musicals, but I'm not singing opera. So something, I mean, you had to have talent, but what kind of moved you more into that? And how did you make it to where you were winning a Grammy? I mean, that's something you don't hear very often.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, when I went to my undergraduate university, when you go to school for music, or I went for music theater, and a lot of people don't realize this, but any kind of music major or theater major for the most part, but mostly music majors and musical theater majors, the amount of credit hours you have to take in school, I think the average credit hours are 16 hours a semester. I was taking 22, 24 credit hours a semester. I believe, from my understanding, that music and getting a medical degree are the two degrees with the most required credit hours that you take in college. So one of the things that you have to forego when you go to school is you kind of lose having a life. You are practicing anywhere between 2 to 4 hours a day alone in a practice room with a piano. You're taking a high level of credit hours, which means you're always in class anywhere from 8 in the morning. And then it's not uncommon to have like a rehearsal for a show until 10 o'clock at night. And so it's it takes a lot of perseverance to get through that day and to get through a program like that. So when I was graduating from my undergrad, I did what most music theater students do. Our school has something that they call a showcase, and they take all the graduating seniors and they send them to New York City, and you get to sing in front of a bunch of casting agents and producers of shows, and it's a fantastic experience. You get to go up, sing maybe 1-2 songs. We do a choreographed number so they can see how you move on stage and things of that nature. And in that showcase, we get to go around and introduce ourselves afterward to a lot of the the representatives and the producers of shows. And one of the producers said, you could easily do something like the national tour of Les Miserables, something along those lines, Phantom of the Opera, something that has a little bit more of legitimate singing. And he said, I would recommend, though, that you look into opera. You got a big voice. You got a great stage presence. He said, I could see you having a decent opera career. And this was a talent agent that recommended this to me. So I had auditioned for a couple of graduate school programs at the University of Cincinnati, University of Michigan, couple other places, and I ended up getting a full scholarship to go to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where I ended up staying for my master's and doctorate. And I took all the knowledge that I had as a music theater major, which is more balanced because you're taking music classes, voice classes, but you're also taking drama and theater classes, and you're taking a ton of dance and a ton of movement classes. I was able to take that background and then transfer it to the opera world, which isn't that different from music theater. Now, opera was the birth of the American music theater, came out of opera. Opera was an art form that was primarily popular in Europe. And it was a gathering place. This is where your local community would come. Some of the smaller companies would do tours all around these small little towns in Europe. And all these little towns in Europe had opera houses. And they may not have been big. They may have only held 500-600 people. But a lot of these smaller communities in Europe had opera houses so that the opera companies could send like a traveling troupe. And that's where people came from the countryside, and they gathered, and it was a social event, and it gave people an excuse to dress up. And it was part of their culture. It was a way to escape. There was no television. There were no movies. This was their form of entertainment. So fast forward throughout the years when America started the Industrial Revolution and we needed more workers, and we started bringing immigrants over from Europe, the culture came with the immigrants. So, for example, if you go out to Colorado or you go out to California, even Nevada, even Nebraska, some of these tiny little small towns, you'll see that they have an opera house. And you're like, well, where did this come from? And then you find out, well, that's because when the gold rush happened, and they needed miners from Europe to come from Wales and to come from Cornish miners, Welsh miners, miners from Italy that knew this experience on how to mine for minerals. They emigrated to the United States and then went west to where the gold was. And then as they would set up in these little gold mine towns, while they were building these mines, they also built an opera house because they still needed that center for their community, for their entertainment. So, you go to tiny little towns like Grand Island, Nebraska, Central City, Colorado, Leadville, Colorado, Aspen, Colorado. You go out west and all of a sudden you see all these tiny little opera houses. And that's because Europe brought that entertainment with them. So that entertainment grew the American musical theater.
And you seem so connected to it, and this is awesome. Like I'm like enthralled, but we got to get to how we're gonna do it. Like, how are people gonna?
I have one quick question though. Like, as I'm thinking about this, and we all have kids. When you just had your first theater experience, your junior year in high school, and then you're going off to college, you're like, I'm gonna major in musical theater. That's a big commitment at that point.
It was. And my dad at the time said, there's no way you'll ever have a career in music. So
I would imagine a lot of parents would say that.
Yeah. See, anyway, this is a good segue. You guys are doing the easy work.
Right.
So and I trying to get it because I want to hear how to do it, because your connection to the music seems like beyond the music. And I think that's a really important thing to bring out as we're talking today about the practical steps, right? Because you're sort of picking an impractical career. And well, you know, I mean, and I'm not saying impractical in terms of what, like, its use, like, not in that regard, but like other careers, it's kind of like you go and you do certain things and you might be an apprentice and then a journeyman, or music seems like a totally different thing. And that's why when I say impractical, like impractical in terms of your odds of making it and making a living.
Well, that's a great point. The odds are not great. I recently read a study that something like only 8% of people with music or theater degrees or performing arts degrees end up having a lifelong career in that field. And that's pretty low. That's pretty low. But you will not find more passionate people about what they do. And that passion, even after, let's say your music career doesn't work out, that passion, that drive, that the endurance, the tenacity that it takes to get that degree transfers anywhere else. You can transfer all the skills that it takes to become a professional musician into any profession you go into. You talk to any kind of hiring personnel, any kind of people that recruiters for companies, they look for classical musicians. They look for people with music degrees because they know what kind of work ethic they have.
Yeah, I was
they
know
the
discipline it's like military.
Takes. Yeah,
I didn't know. So what's the first step? Does that depend on where you are in life?
Well, I think the first step is you obviously have to have passion. You have to have talent, a little bit of talent. But the first step is you know, like if I were a parent and I was telling a parent what to do with a child that's showing interest in a musical career, is start off by getting lessons early. Learn how to read music, learn how to sight read, get it in your ear, get it in your body. The second thing you should do early on is dance classes. Even if you're not a dancer, even if you're awkward, you know, when I was in high school, I sprouted straight up, but not out. So I was 6'4", 139 pounds. I think I probably could have blown away in the wind, and I looked terrible dancing back then. But what that did was it helped me build confidence on stage. It helped me learn my own body. It helped me realize, like, hey, these are the tools that I'm working with. So let's figure out a way to work with them in a way that's going to help me moving forward. So those are the first steps.
Wait, can I ask a couple clarifying questions? First, you know, a lot of our listeners may be people moving into a second act. And I know you and Marya know that, being mediators. Is it, you know, it's like starting young, totally get it. But is it something someone can do as they get older? But also, you know, I think when we talk about doing this as a career, careers are different now, right? So it could be like all of us do other things, right? You're our guest on a podcast where we have other jobs and we're doing this. And hopefully someday it'll make some money, whatever. But is it something someone can do as a side hustle and at least make enough money to finance it or to do certain things? Because I think that's when we talk about careers, I think these days people carry around a couple of different careers.
Yeah.
I mean, as for a side hustle, I mean, listen, if you're going to get hired by some of the top level companies in the United States, they're going to be paying for that talent level. So if you're getting into, say, like the Chicago Symphony or the Lyric Opera of Chicago or the Metropolitan Opera or even the Symphony Chorus with the New York Philharmonic, you know, you're talking almost more than a side hustle because you're getting compensated anywhere between $70 to $90 an hour. It pays well when you work. The thing is, though, is that because the United States doesn't necessarily appreciate arts as much as Europe does. Plus Europe, a lot of their arts organizations are state sponsored. So tax money helps supplement many of the costs in Europe. We don't have any of that support in the United States other than the National Endowment of the Arts. But the National Endowment of the Arts, that money comes into a pool and it splinters out into, it doesn't matter how big or how small your organization is, it sends out the same amount of money. So for a larger organization, that's not going to be a lot. That's not going to keep you afloat. So it comes down to corporate sponsorships. It comes down to your board members and how strong your board is. And so when it comes to like a side hustle. If you can get to that level, if you have the perseverance, if you have the tenacity to get through it and the drive really, and if you're able to get to that level, a polished level of, I like to, a lot of people are very familiar with sports and maybe not as familiar with classical arts. Look at it this way. It's funny when you see an orchestra go on strike, or a chorus or professional musicians go on strike, and you read in the paper they make $200,000 a year. People are up in arms. People are like, holy cow, they should be doing this for free. This is a hobby. But yet nobody has a problem when the Cubs pay a closing pitcher that doesn't pitch in every game, but has a very specialized skill to pitch in that ninth inning to get that save. And they pay them $14 million a year to pitch that one inning. And that's okay.
Right. No, I totally hear you. I think before we go to commercial break, though, we got to go to the second step. So I love having you on a guest, man. You take us all over the place. I love it. So now that people are taking lessons, and what I'm getting from your first step is, I think our listeners will range a gamut, right? There might be people who had a musical background and then are looking at saying, I'm in a second act and that's what I loved. Mm-hmm. And that's going to give me something post divorce or in another phase of their life. And there's people who have done nothing, right? So it sounds like it's either getting trained or polishing your skills, kind of that first step.
I would imagine too, there's a lot of people who, like you, Matt, did it in high school or did it in college and really liked it, but had someone in their ear that said, you're never going to make a living at this, or, you're never going to be able to support your family on this. And so they didn't follow that path.
Yeah. You see that a lot. And then as they look back or have certain regrets, they go back, and it's not uncommon to see retirees start taking voice lessons. Marya and I know a judge who has always wanted to take voice lessons and never did, and finally started taking voice lessons, and then finally got the courage to audition for the Indianapolis Symphony Chorus and got in and was able to sing the Messiah with the Indianapolis Symphony. Yeah. And their day job is still a judge. But man, the one thing she said to me was she didn't realize how much hard work, how much practice, what drive it took to even get to that spot. And then she was flabbergasted being surrounded by all of these professional musicians, like, holy cow, these people are good. These people, we're talking about that specialized skill, like the closing pitcher for the Cubs. This is a very specialized skill that people have spent hours and hours and hours honing that skill.
Right. So now that they're honing or rehoning or they've discovered what's really that second step? Like, what do they do next after they've figured out whether, I think, one, they have the drive, skill, and talent and all that. So
second step is going to be your education. That's where you might start taking night classes. That might be where you start looking into getting into a program at a local university. There's a lot of colleges that offer, part-time degrees in music, and just exploring, finding out new things, getting lost in the music library and, pulling music randomly off a shelf and looking through it and say, wow, this is a hidden gem that nobody's ever heard about, starting to get more familiar with more, everybody knows the top 10 classical hits, but getting more familiar with some of the obscure hits.
So wait, let me ask a question though, because, I think our last guest, we talked a lot about finding information on the internet. Mm-hmm. And I think what scares people off is like budget, right? Like, it's especially if as some of our listeners maybe they're coming out of a divorce, they're now in a different financial situation. Are there a lot of good free resources to get information on this kind of thing and finding where within music you might find your passion?
That's a really great question. And, there's a lot of resources available out there, including LinkedIn. This month, every month, LinkedIn offers a free education course. It's part of their educational courses that they offer, and it's a paid subscription. But every month they offer a free one. And this month is how to play bass guitar. And it's available for free. on LinkedIn for the entire month of February. So anybody that's ever been interested in playing bass guitar or maybe wants to take a virtual lesson, you can watch that video and learn how to play the string bass, or how to play the bass guitar and learn your basic chords. And then it gives you some options from there on where you can continue that path. So yeah, there's plenty of material. There's plenty of resources out there that are available widely online. The one thing, because of COVID, it affected the performing arts world probably more than any other field out there. They were the first ones to close. Theaters closed immediately, and everybody was instantly laid off, and nobody was making money. And they're just gradually, slowly coming back because they're finding audiences are a little nervous about sitting in a 3,000 or 4,000 seat auditorium.
Wait, I hate to do this. We're going to speaking of money, we got to go to our sponsors, and then we're going to come back. We'll finish 2 and talk through the other steps. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back in a few. I am muted. All right, we are back getting Started.Life with our guest this week, Matthew Carrol, Grammy Award-winning singer, opera singer, just musical guy extraordinaire. And as a reminder, this week's show is brought to you by Red Leg Funding and Keystone Mediation. So before we went into the commercial, we were talking about step 2, and I'm so worried about time. Again, this is why I love you as a guest. I always like to worry about time and not whether there will be conversation.
Yes.
So now that they've kind of honed they've honed their skills or gotten some skills, and they're starting to kind of explore that world. They're finding the information out there. What's next? What would be that third step?
Yeah, the third step is the discipline that it takes to keep up those skills and to recognize that, for every position that's open, there's going to be, 100 to 200 people applying for that position. And right before the break, I was saying the pandemic was really difficult for the performing arts world. But one of the advantages is that people transferred teaching and teaching these skills to people online. So, these kind of like Zoom music lessons are very common now. And it's a way for artists to supplement their income while they're having some downtime. So that third step is continuing with those lessons, keeping up with the discipline, but also recognizing that it's very difficult. And sometimes it may not mean because you're not talented, because you don't have the right sound. It might be something as simple as you didn't fit the costume. It might be as simple as you're too tall for the role. So recognizing that third step is how difficult the business is, how hard it can be to get in, how hard it can be, when you realize, hey, there's a position open and there's 400 applicants for it.
So wait, let me ask a question on that, because it seems like it would be a very lonely thing, or you feel very isolated doing it yourself. And I'm a ex-military guy, so my mind all of a sudden went to like having a battle buddy, right? Like somebody who keeps you on track, who checks you, makes sure you're all right. How does somebody find, because it seems like it would make sense to have somebody
Absolutely.
You could commiserate after an audition or something like that. How do you find those people?
Yeah, so there's performing arts coaches available out there everywhere, and a coach is very specifically trained. They are usually phenomenal pianists. They help you prepare for those auditions, both mentally and musically. So they're getting you ready. Those coaches are getting you ready, and coaches charge anywhere between $80 an hour to $200 an hour, depending on their career and their reputation, and are they just coming out of school, or are they well established? And so there's performing arts coaches, there's diction coaches, diction to help you sing in foreign languages.
Can I ask you on that one?
Yeah,
we were taught, again, when we talked to opera, I think the only opera I've ever seen, I was in Vienna as like a cadet, or as a lieutenant after I graduated, and obviously it wasn't in English, right?
Yeah.
And more often than not, operas aren't. Did you have to learn those languages, or was it, you kind of got by phonetically?
Both. So part of the degree at the University of Michigan was that you had to pass a fluency examination in 2 different languages other than English. That was part of your education. But the other thing is that there's this incredible language that a lot of people don't know about. It's called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. IPA lets you, once you learn the alphabet, once you learn it's a series of all these different shapes, and once you learn the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, it helps you learn how to pronounce any language in the world. IPA is a very specific to learning foreign languages, but IPA is very important for the opera world because you may not know every single word. The very first thing I do when I get a piece of music that's in a different language, I translate it. That's the first thing I do, because you have to know what you're singing. You have to know what the composer wanted. Whereas, every opera came from a story. Every opera came from a novel or a book, or, modern operas now come from movies. One of the last operas I was in at the Lyric Opera of Chicago was Dead Man Walking, which came from Sister Helen Prejean's book, which was then a Academy Award winning a movie, and now it's an opera. So you have to know what the story is. You have to know what you're saying. Then you break it down phonetically with the IPA so that you're pronouncing it correctly, because you may not be a fluent speaker, but you have to sing it as if you were. And that takes
I'm laughing because
time and skill.
IPA, this is how you're a music guy and I'm a beer drinker. Like IPA, totally different thing.
Ale versus International Phonetic Alphabet.
Yes. Yeah. So
Doug's like, I'm fluent in the IPA. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know, man. You know what? I've gotten away from them. They got a little too hoppy. Yeah. So as they're working through this, right? They're figuring out, they're finding assistance out there. Yeah. What would your advice be as they're doing this, not to stray from the path? Because what I'm hearing is it's hard, it's frustrating, it's demoralizing, and expensive. So, if someone wants to do this, it sounds like this is like talking you out of it, .life today, because, I think most people would be listening and saying, well, I don't have the resources, inclination, and anything to do it. Like, how do you stay on that path?
Yeah, again, that's where that passion that's deep down that you can't replace. It's where you never want to give up. You hire that coach, you audition for a good talent agent, and then that it's that agent's job to find you work, or at least get you in the door for an audition.
Well, let me ask you a question on that, though, because like when you were talking about musicals, right? I'm like, hey, we were both in High School Musicals. For anyone wondering, I was Action in West Side Story.
Awesome.
There you go. But nobody was saying this is what you need to do for a career. In fact, a lot of people said, great job. Don't consider that a career, right? So
don't call us, we'll call you.
Exactly. Yeah. So as you're talking about this, right, and that third step, and we realize one of the reasons we got these 5 steps that we approach it that way is you might find during a particular step that it isn't right? Like there's persistence versus reality. Like how does somebody, like if they get to step 3 and it's like, it's just never going to happen, right? Like how, like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that leads into what I consider is kind of step 4, which is having realistic expectations and having a
Okay.
backup plan. If you really gave it your all, you committed to it, you had a talent agent, you had a coach pushing you. Some people get some minor success. You get a gig here, you get a gig there. You start thinking, okay, well, I'm building momentum. And then all of a sudden you go a year without having a gig. Professional musicians know that you better get good at waiting tables. When you live in New York City and you're running to an audition, you're waiting tables on the side, because while you're getting ready for that job, hopefully for that audition, you got to pay the bills. So you have to have a little side hustle to support your legitimate hustle, which is what you want it to be one day, which is what you said is expensive, can be demoralizing. I think I recently read that many music theater people and actors, they audition something like 50, 60, 70 times before they finally land that big role. That's not for everybody. Anybody that it doesn't take rejection well or doesn't have thick skin, and after the 10th audition and you're not getting that gig, gosh, it's hard to find sometimes that passion. It's hard to find
Right.
motivation to keep going. But
it's like that hot actor or actress that is a success overnight after 20 years of trying, right? Like,
right.
I could totally see that.
Exactly. Yeah. So step 4 is going to be having those realistic expectations and having that backup plan. Like, okay, I gave it my all. I hired the coach. I had a little bit of success, but you know what? It didn't amount for whatever reason. It may mean because there's not enough jobs for everybody. It may mean because you don't have the right look. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not talented. It just might mean you weren't at the right place at the right time. So having those realistic expectations, having that backup plan, recognizing that just because you're a musician doesn't mean you don't have skills that transfer to other things. We talked about this earlier about, many recruiters are looking for those ex-musicians because they know the discipline that it takes to have that kind of fortitude to push through that. So that's probably step 4, is having those realistic expectations.
And what's a good way to determine if your expectations are in fact realistic, right? Like, I've had some realistic expectations on projects around the house that were probably very unrealistic when I finally finished. And, having someone look and say, you know what, this is a 5-hammer job, man. You're about a 3-hammer guy. Yeah. So is this where a coach can help with that? Or are there other resources to like send examples of your work to other people? And I probably said it wrong with examples of your work, but examples of your performances, and have people say, you know what, you're probably a great guy. You're just not going to make it unless you're hugely lucky or rich.
Is that the talent agent?
Yeah, talent agents will tell you that. I mean, they'll flat out tell you that. They're gonna when you have an agent, they're gonna just be like, "Listen, kid, I don't think you have it," and that's okay. There's still other things you can still do. I can tell music's important to you, so maybe you want to consider a teaching career. Maybe you want to consider mentoring other young performers. There's you can still keep it as part of what you do, especially if you have a passion for it. There's no reason why you can't find other areas. It just might mean you're not going to get that dream job that you always hoped that you would get.
Right.
And then I think that leads kind of into step 5 of, let's say you do hit it big, or let's say you are very successful and you have a decent career, keeping up with those skills. Don't rest on your laurels, because that younger person right out of college is going to challenge you 20 years from now, and you better be ready for that. So don't take it for granted. Keep up on those skills, keep working, but also know when it's time to let go. For me personally, I knew it was time to let go about 4 years ago. I got very lucky because I got cast in a phenomenal production of Jesus Christ Superstar. And that production is now the national tour that's going around the United States and Europe. It's probably one of the best productions of Jesus Christ Superstar you'll ever see, and maybe one of the best productions you'll ever see. I had a good friend of mine who's an attorney who saw it, and he said, I love Hamilton, and I thought Hamilton was the coolest thing I've ever seen, but this might actually beat it. Like, it was really that great. But at the dance audition, I was looking at 20-year-old kids dancing circles around me.
Literally, right?
Literally dancing started performing. And I realized, like, okay, it's time. It's time. I can't compete with that anymore. You know, you think, again, you go to the athletes, you think of the Tom Brady and the Ben Roethlisbergers and these people that are looking at kids literally 20 years younger than them, and they know it's time to hang it up. I still was cast in it because they found some other ways to use me, thank God, because it was such a great show and they wanted my voice in it. So they kind of made up some background characters and they taught me some choreography that I could do in the background that matched everybody, but they definitely had me in the back.
You're like the guy in the exercise videos where like they have the people in front and it's the modified one in back. And you're
Exactly. You know, so like my hands were moving and my body was moving,
Right.
but like it wasn't nearly as detailed as it was up front. And rightfully so. This is a very highly skilled ensemble that are doing 8 shows a day. And it's physically draining. I mean, it was physically draining for the legit dancers, and it was physically draining for me as a 40-year-old man trying to keep up with these 20-year-olds. And like, it was like probably the best shape I've been in a long time because it really forced me. We were doing push-ups backstage. We were doing sit-ups backstage. We were doing everything we could to keep up our bodies and keep our minds into the show. It was really fantastic. But that's when I kind of realized, okay, I'm at that 5th step, Doug. It's time to transition to something new.
So question though, because it makes me think about, like I was actually talking to someone this morning about, you know, some of the shows I watch or whatever. And you see like certain actors who are on all these shows, really good character actors, right? And is that something that you can do instead of hanging it up? Again, reset the expectations, right? You might not be the lead, but they're actually, I'm guessing, some really cool roles or things that you can do. You know, when you were talking about, you know, it seems like every production, like every play I've seen, there's like a comedy number, and it's like never the star, and it's usually not like some buff dude or something like that. It's like comedy. So are there things people can do to find age appropriate, body appropriate things so that they can maybe get those extra years?
Yeah, you start transitioning
maybe at the end of their life anyhow. So
yeah, I mean, it's like you start transitioning to the roles of the parent, or like if you remember West Side Story, the last time we just did it a couple years ago, and I was the guy at the gym that was in charge of the dance, you know. So like I start transitioning to more of these character older man roles, you know, which are probably more appropriate for me. So yes, you don't have to hang it up. But I'll tell you, when you perform at such a high level for so long, and then you start recognizing that your physical limitations are preventing you from performing at that level, it's a difficult transition.
So also brass tacks too, as you start to transition to those roles, is it a full-time, pays as well as it did 10 years ago career, or is it something that becomes more part-time while you transition into another career?
Yeah, I think it's probably more part-time. Now, that not that there aren't character actors that go around and do like a Chicago Fire episode and then something else. But, you know, again, that's not consistent work. You're not getting your retirement plan. You're not getting your health insurance provided. You're your own business. And that's the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that most professional musicians are their own business. And
would you mean like incorporated? Like,
oh, literally? Absolutely. Some of the top opera stars, they even have, you know, they have their own tax people. They have to pay 10% of every dollar they make goes to their talent agent. Another 5% might go to their manager. They may have a nutritionist that follows them around, or even a private chef, or so there's all these different levels. If you're at that top level, you know, that's pretty common with some of the top level actors that you see from Hollywood. You know, there's a reason why they look that good at 40, 50 years old, because they have their own gym. They have their own personal trainer. They have their own nutritionist. They're taking gene immunization therapies. They're doing all these neat things that they can do, they can afford. But when you're a character actor or even a character performer in musicals and operas, you know, it's not going to be as fortuitous of a career.
So question on that before we go to the mistake, something that you touched on that we've had actually shows about, do people need to be ready for like lifestyle changes, right? Because if you're a smoker, your voice probably ain't going to be good. If you're not eating well, like everything seems really tied together. Is this something that they really need to be thinking about?
Absolutely. I mean, it takes one vocal injury to wreck your career. Not supporting your voice properly, not getting vocal nodes or getting problems with your vocal cords that could end a career. An injury, a bad hamstring that never heals right, can completely derail a ballet dancer's career. Things like that. Absolutely. It's not the average lifespan of a performing ballerina and ballet star is, I don't think they go more than 28, 29 years old, and they're transitioning to something else. A lot of them naturally transition into like a yoga instructor kind of career. They have their own yoga studios. It's not uncommon to see former ballerinas and ballet dancers having their own yoga studios as they get older, or Pilates studio. That's kind of their natural transition. But we have these really fantastic funds that a lot of people don't know about. There's a fund based out of New York and LA called the Actors Fund. And that Actors Fund is primarily set up through private donations for people to transition to new careers once their performing arts career is over. So this is a thing. I mean, it's a pretty well-known thing. People know the shelf life.
Interesting. So we always like to end with a mistake. Like, what's the biggest mistake that you see people make when they want to pursue this as a career?
The biggest mistake I think people make, go back to college, go back to that early second step, your education step, and they think their passion and their love for the arts and their love for what they do kind of blinds them. And they think like every kid does at that age, they think like, I'm bulletproof. I'm just going to make it. So I'm not going to get that secondary education. I'm not going to get that other degree. If you want to get a music degree, I love the arts. I'm a huge arts fan. I wish it was more mainstream in our society. I wish people appreciated it. I wish people supported it. I wish people would recognize it for being a legitimate. The amount of money that the performing arts world brings into major cities is staggering, because through tourism dollars and through people going to the restaurants after or before a show, like it's all related to the fabric of a major city. And I wish people would legitimize the degree, the performing arts world as being a very highly trained, highly skilled job. Nobody, I tell people this all the time that aren't familiar with the performing arts, is if you needed to go get a brain tumor removed, are you going to have your general practitioner do the surgery? Or are you going to go to that specialized person to get that surgery done? It's no different in the performing arts world. You can go see a community orchestra of volunteers, or you could go see the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, who are made up of 60 specialized musicians that have done nothing but this music for their entire career. And you're never going to hear anything better. You're never going to hear a better concert. The goosebumps, the energy level that you feel when you're in that hall, it's like you get lost and you're like, hey, I just realized I shut my phone off for 3 hours. I had an emotional response. I have goosebumps all over my arms, and that was freaking awesome. And people don't experience that anymore, and we got to get people back into experiencing it. Going back to the
Mistake
people make is when you're in college and you want to get that music degree, it only takes like maybe one extra semester to pick up that second major. Do it while you're there. It's good to have the fallback plan. I think the biggest mistake people make is I'm going to make it in this world. Well, stats go against you. The statistics show that, like I said, I think only 8% of people with those degrees make it for a lifelong career. So statistics don't back you up. So that's where I would like to talk to my younger self and say, hey, stay an extra year, get that economics degree, get that law degree, get whatever degree while I'm there. It's only going to take me an additional year. What's an additional year when that's going to be my back? That can be my fallback as I get older.
It's an investment.
It's an investment in yourself.
The flip side of that, though, and I think one of the key takeaways that I learned is that how respected the music degree is on its own, right? Like for kids who are thinking about going to college and want to get a music degree, that it can translate into so many other things, and that it is respected by HR professionals and recruiters and stuff because of, I wouldn't know how much work it took. until you told us. So I think that's really interesting.
I had kids who are musicians. I totally get it. And it's hard. It's almost like when you get out of the military, same thing. Like people who know it, get it. And they're like, oh yeah, we're going to hire that kind of person.
But, as a warning to people that are considering hiring a classical musician, one of the drawbacks is that they have to realize that musicians have high expectations for themselves and others in their lives.
Right.
And sometimes a coworker or a boss don't live up to that person's expectations, because as a musician, we have been so disciplined. We have practiced so much that we set ourselves up for this extremely high standard. And it's difficult for us to realize, like, hey, not everybody's going to be on that same page.
So I do want to close out the show and you talk just real quick and let people know what you do. I do have to end before we go there with a dad joke, because I was wondering, when you sing, do you call it caroling? There you go.
No, before we wrap it up, though, we have to see show and tell.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So this is your Grammy.
Yeah.
So last year, this is a pretty cool story, and this just kind of tells you exactly about where we are in classical music world. The Chicago Symphony did a concert that I was involved in, and it was a fantastic concert. The music was different. It's only been performed twice in the United States, so it's relatively new to the United States. It's Shostakovich's 13th Symphony. And so we did this concert, and it was really a fantastic concert, and it was nominated for a Grammy, but it was up against some pretty stiff competition, so we didn't think we were going to win. And sure enough, I got a Grammy Award. I got paid $14 for the recording. It cost me $75 for them to ship this to me. So I'm negative,
like a Grammy.
Negative $50 on this deal, but I got a Grammy Award. It hangs on my wall.
I'd have a Grammy tattoo somewhere, man.
There you go.
Yeah. So real quick, because we are running out of time, your plan B, right? You're doing something else now, and I think people love working with people who they like and who have other things. But you are a mediator as well, and you work with Keystone Mediation. And if people want to get hold of you, primarily it sounds like marital stuff, but you do all kind of mediation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In
now,
fact, I recently did a mediation in downtown Chicago that was related to the performing arts world. There was conflict between a ballet company and the facilities of the dressing rooms that the theater provided them, and it wasn't working for them. And I was able to help mediate an agreement between the two parties so that everybody's concerns and needs were heard. And that kind of gave me that full closure. Like, here I am still helping people in the performing arts world doing what I do now for a living.
Now, do you do it like in opera when you do the mediation, like a J.G. Wentworth ad?
Yeah, exactly.
So if people want to get hold of you, they can reach you at www.keystonemediation.com. I think your whole bio and your contact information is there, correct?
That's
correct.
What's a good
number if they want to call you up?
Yeah, 219-440-1882. And
you're out of Indiana, but you can mediate anywhere you can, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I'm in Chicago all the time. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the show. Like, again, it's always awesome having, because again, the work's easy for me. The hard work is like, how are we going to get it all in one show? But thank you for coming on the show. You've been listening to Getting Started.Life. We're a show about starting new things and about what you really need to do it and to see if it's for you. So if you have something to share, reach out to us. We'd love to have you on the show and help other people start maybe an endeavor that you love. If there's something you want to know about, go to gettingstarted.life. It's actually the URL, and let us know what you want to hear about. We'll find the experts. Again, this show this week has been brought to you by Keystone Mediation and Red Leg Funding. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks. I think we have a great show coming up in 2 weeks. Who's our show in 2 weeks?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
It's either the elderly thing, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So we got two great shows coming up. So again, we'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you later.